Supervisor Bussey is probably still on mute.
Still on what?
She is muted right now.
Betty
Can
Jo?
you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Lord, during this difficult time, we want to ask you to please increase our vision of what can be. So what action needs to be developed. Enable all of us to accept new ideas and to listen. And please help all our dedicated frontliners that are there for us. Amen.
Thank you, Supervisor Bussey. I'm going to ask that we amend the agenda to not do the Pledge of Allegiance so we don't all know that we have flags and we aren't all gathered in one place. And I'm going to ask that there be no citizen participation since we received no emails from anybody wishing to address the board by noon today. Would someone care to move the amending the agenda to that level? Moved by Supervisor Fox, seconded by Supervisor Owens. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed with no? Motion carried. Will the clerk call the roll, please?
Here.
Present.
Bell. Egger.
Here.
Beaver.
Present.
Potter.
Here.
Mawhinney.
Here.
Fox.
Here.
Richard.
Here.
Lokrans. Gustina.
Here.
Bussey.
Here.
Davis. I can see Wes is here, but he hasn't unmuted his phone. Thomas.
Here.
Knutson.
Here.
Finish. Coleman.
Here.
Rashkin. Gramke.
Here.
Coleman.
Here.
Levy.
Here.
Brill.
Here.
Schultz. I can see that Kathy's here with her mic's muted. Zajac.
I'm here.
Bostwick.
Here.
Sweeney.
Here.
Baumkamp.
Here.
Owens.
Here.
Bryan.
Here.
Podzilny.
Here.
26 present, 3 absent, 0 vacant.
We have a quorum. Next item, please.
Next item. We did adoption of agenda already,
Yes, we did.
sort of. Approval of minutes for March 26, 2020.
Moved by Supervisor Bostwick.
Moved by Supervisor Bostwick. Second by Supervisor Thomas. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those with no? Again, there will be no citizen participation, but any communications and announcements from supervisors at this time?
Mary has one. Mawhinney.
Mary Mawhinney?
Yes. Thank you, Chair Podzilny. At this time, I would like to recognize all the poll workers for the outstanding job they did in the past election. It wasn't easy with all the last-minute changes. I would also like to thank Amy Laudenbach for all the help that she provided, a hand wash station for the town of Bradford, extra hand sanitizer, and her willingness to help wherever she could. A big thank you to the Rock County Clerk's Office, to Chris, Lexi, and Lisa. They were on the phone, sending emails, making sure that everyone was on the same page. We're half done with the election work. Monday after 4, we start the counting process. Thank you again to all that voted absentee to help prevent the spread of the virus. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Mawhinney. Any other comments from supervisors? Anything at all from supervisors?
Mhm.
Lupier?
No comment.
Thank you. Anything from staff at this time? Anything from Randy or Josh or Lisa or Marilyn? Apparently not. Next item, please.
Next item, item 8, nominations, appointments, and confirmations. We do not have any. Item 9, recognition of county employees or others. 9A, National Public Safety Telecommunicator Week, April 12th through the 18th, 2020.
Owens, move it.
Moved by Owens,
Second, Potter.
seconded by Potter. Discussion? Questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed with no. Motion carried. Next item, please.
Item 10, introduction of new resolutions or ordinances by supervisors for referral to appropriate committee. I have not received any in the public comment email.
I will assume that there are none at this time. If you do have them, send them to Lisa or send them to me or send them to Marilyn. Next item, please.
Next item, item 11, reports. 11A, update on COVID-19 and county actions.
Josh?
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to update you on a few items. I'll try to be more brief than last week or last time we met. Just to give you a few updates though, in case you hadn't heard them yet. So from a public health perspective, as far as the COVID-19 cases go, we're up to 451,000 in the United States. That was an increase of 47,000. In Wisconsin, there's 2,885 cases and 111 deaths. And the numbers today from Rock County, 47 positive cases, 888 negative cases, and still only the 2 deaths that have been for most of this week. I would encourage you to go to the Public Health Department's website for updated information on a daily basis. Those numbers are updated every day on their website. Update you on some workforce related issues. Several things I updated you on last time that we were working on, one of which is on your agenda tonight as far as the resolution goes, and we can cover that when the time comes. Administrative orders, you should have gotten in your inbox administrative order number 4 about vacation payout provision temporarily for county employees. That will go to County Board Staff Committee at their next meeting for review. Also, just to foreshadow a little bit, the next one you get is a administrative order establishing temporary guidelines for telework. We felt that the situation is unique enough where we should put together some temporary guidelines for people on what to expect. And so we thought the best way to do that was just through an administrative order, given that it was going to be temporary in nature. And then once we're through this crisis here, we'll rework those to put them into some more permanent order in the policy and procedure manual. Some departmental updates, just a couple things here. I think Kathy Sukas during the resolution further on in your agenda may provide a brief update that's related to that agenda item about what's going on at 911 with regard to computer equipment. And then I know Lisa's had the opportunity to talk about the election, which was the other big event this week, of course, and she can certainly fill you in on that if you need to. The last thing I was gonna mention was the information that's been in the media. We talked about it at our last meeting as well, about information sharing by the health department to first responders and municipalities. So I won't rehash all of that. You've seen some information out there from me and others about that. We continue to have ongoing conversations with our partners about that. Today, for example, I had some conversations with a few of the fire chiefs to try to work through some of that information sharing issues. And I will note that, unfortunately, as the number of cases increases, again, as we're going to be over 50 here very soon, and as I alluded to in my op-ed earlier this week, as we get more cases, expectation is the health department is going to be able to provide a little more information demographics without risking identifying anyone. And so I think what you'll see next, it wasn't quite ready for today, but it'll certainly go out on Monday, is they're going to try to share some aggregate case information in ranges by zip code. And so you'll see some of that on Monday. I'm not sure exactly when that'll be posted to their website, but they're close to being done with that. And hopefully that will be helpful to some people who have interest in that. Certainly willing to answer any questions about that or about anything else related to the county's response right now.
Supervisor Von Camp, I believe you have a question.
Yeah, I do. I'm not happy with the health director not releasing this information. The Janesville Fire Department found out about Oak Park Place by an anonymous call. We sent several people there. Like I said, my issue, Monday I was on the radio. My issue was with what are we going to do with these people at 2 a.m. when someone doesn't show up for work and they don't have enough people? What happened on Tuesday, Riverside, California? We had to come in and take care of the nursing home because nobody showed up on staff. That's what emergency planning is about. That's why this information is so important for her to share it with us so we know it ahead of time. We shouldn't find out when the public finds out that where the cases are. We couldn't be sending people in there. We could have called them ahead of time. That's what emergency planning does. We could have called them ahead of time and said, hey, we understand you're having issues. Let's work on this. We could have told them when we come there for a patient, we can meet them at the closest door. So we don't have to send somebody through. Without knowing this information, we don't have that. I understand that they're relaying it through the 911 system, but we don't find out that information until we go on that call. And at 2 a.m. is not the right time. And I can tell you that 2 a.m, I cannot get a hold of people that need to get hold of when there's an issue. What if there was a fire in that facility? What would be done with those patients? Do they even have a plan right now to do with patients to move them somewhere? This is emergency planning. I have 20 years experience in emergency planning. I don't know how much the health director has, but it must not be much because she's not sharing the information that should be shared. I sent her 8 questions to answer today. One was the information that's being requested, is it illegal to give out? She didn't say yes or no. She didn't really answer the question at all. If it's information, it's pertinent, it helps the first responders respond, we should be getting that information to them. And if she's not going to do it, we need to force her. Either Josh needs to step up and says she needs to release it, or if there's a way that as the county board, we can create a resolution quickly to make her release that information. That's all I have on that.
Thank you, Supervisor Von Camp. Any other questions of Josh? Any other comments about the message he just delivered?
I can respond briefly. Supervisor Baumkamp and I have had a couple conversations about this, and so I'm very clear on his position and the good points he makes. I just reiterate some of the things I've said before. As far as the authority goes, my position on the matter is that under the law, it is our health officer's decision to make, not mine and not the board's. In the same way that we rely on our experts and our professionals to make decisions about when children are taken away from their families in child welfare or any number of other places where those aren't necessarily policy decisions. And I believe the federal law requires that Ms. Sandoval make that decision, number one. And I think it's important to note that, that I think that there's some very good points, on all sides of this. And that's why I continue to try to work towards increased information sharing. I would note, just for context, regardless of the good or the bad on any side, I'm not aware of any other county right now that is sharing the type of information that we're talking about at the case level. And maybe there are others. Milwaukee County might be one, because I know they're doing more than other counties are. Again, if there's other examples about that, I'd welcome to get that information. I just haven't seen it yet. And then as far as the answer about the question about is it illegal, I would certainly say illegal is not the right word to use. I think the way I describe HIPAA is it's permissive. So under all of the language about HIPAA, it's permissive, and it uses that the health officer, the health professional, under the language used in HIPAA, may release the information if she believes there's an imminent threat. And I think that's where the distinction is that certainly there's a difference in opinion on what is an imminent threat based on the circumstances of the cases right now. So again, I think that there's a lot of good points all around this. There's a lot of tension around it right now, but just to kind of, I guess, to try to be answer as much as I can right now, I guess that's just what I would say.
Supervisor Baumkamp, I have also spoken with Noelle, and I share your feelings, and I shared those with her. I felt that we should be giving out more information rather than less, because I felt the greater good outweighed the privacy in this matter. So I have spoken with her and encouraged her to take a look at this on a continuing basis, and please release more information as she feels it's appropriate. Let's say I encouraged her to do that, but I can't command her to do that. So it's not going unnoticed. I want you to be aware of that we are speaking with her. Other questions? Tom, Brian, do you have your hand up?
Yes. One of the things too, the Janesville City Council on our meeting this coming Monday night is going to have a resolution dealing with this problem too. So that'll be coming forward, I'm sure, after Monday's meeting.
Thank you, Supervisor Brian. I had heard that was going to be a consideration at their meeting, but I just learned about that late this afternoon.
If you go on the Janesville City Council website, you can see their agenda, and it's got the whole resolution and discussion on it.
Okay. Anything else on the subject we're talking about?
Can I make one more comment?
Yes. Go ahead, Supervisor Baumkamp.
In her email, she thinks that the patient's privacy is more important than the first responders' well-being, and that there is a clause in HIPAA for imminent threat, and that's put in there for situations like this. And by her not seeing this as a threat to first responders is very poor judgment on her part. I don't know what to do. Is it something where she has to be removed so this information gets done, or what? But it needs to get out. And this is an imminent threat. We've never seen anything like this in over 100 years. And we got people calling the fire stations and letting us know that they're self-quarantined. They have no problem with that information going out. They're not going to be discriminated against because they have this. And that's the intent of HIPAA, not so much patient information being held back. It's to protect their rights. And if this isn't a case for it, there never is one. And my opinion, her judgment is way off on this. That's all I have.
Thank you, Supervisor Bobby. I will be talking with her on a daily basis. I can't force her to do anything any more than Josh can, but I'm going to be friendly persuasion, shall we say? Thank you. Any other comments on this subject at this time? Supervisor Sweeney?
I have no comment.
Okay. Seeing no hands go up, I guess we can move on to the next item, Lisa.
Item 12, new business. 12A, supplementary appropriations and budget changes. 12A1, establishing the Rock County COVID-19 Emergency Small Business Loan Fund.
Sweeney moved.
Moved by Supervisor Sweeney.
Thomas seconds.
Seconded by Supervisor Thomas. Supervisor Sweeney, would you give us a quick fill-in here?
I would like Josh and or James to take this, please.
Is James with us?
Yes.
Yep.
James, if you want to start, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, thank you and good evening. So what you have before you is a very detailed and somewhat complex resolution, but I'll try to boil it down and obviously try to take my time with explaining things, and then certainly we'll open up for questions. So this particular resolution is asking the county board to establish a Rock County COVID Emergency Small Business Loan Fund. In a nutshell, the purpose of this small business loan fund is to help existing small businesses in Rock County stabilize, sustain, strengthen, and/or restart their operations. Why are we proposing this? First and foremost, nearly 85% of all the businesses in Rock County have fewer than 20 employees. Secondly, a number of these small businesses have been dealing disproportionately with the negative impacts of the social distancing as well as safer at home policies that have been invoked at the state and or local or federal levels. Also, a number of these businesses are going to have a difficult time recovering unless there are sufficient resources being made available for them. And although there are a number of resources that have been packaged up at the federal level, others that likely will be packaged up at the state level, I can attest to you that there will not be enough resources to go around for everybody, and we can get into those details on that. A number of models across the nation, including a handful in Wisconsin, as well as those on the West and East Coast, have been used as templates for this. Different levels of government, whether it's at the municipal level or county and or regional, are all responding in similar fashion in terms of establishing some sort of emergency fund. Some are going with a grant-based approach. Others are going with a loan-based approach. This particular program that we're asking for the board's support would be a small business loan, specifically for working capital needs. It would have a 1% interest rate and have the ability to be structured up to a 5-year term. Additional details include the ability to have both principal and interest deferred for a period of up to 6 months. This would be aimed at the job creators specifically in the small business arena. And more importantly, there's a variety of caveats that would exclude and or include different types of small businesses. So as an example, a small business that had 21 employees would not be able to qualify for this. More importantly, a small business with 15 employees that happen to have over $1 million in annual revenue would not be able to qualify for this. The business would have to be in Rock County and be open for business for at least 12 consecutive months prior to the current COVID pandemic. And there's a host of other qualifiers and eligibility requirements associated with it. Again, this is designed to help either be a bridge or a conduit for additional financing, whether that financing would come from a local financial institution, perhaps from the SBA and or the state, if they were to qualify and be successful in those very competitive application processes. And the intent here is to really help our small businesses get their feet underneath them, to help manage this process and to help govern it and to have the accountability and transparency that's going to be necessary for this. A 7-member loan review committee will be appointed by the chair of the Board of Supervisors. 4 members of that will be county board supervisors, and 3 members will be representing the general public. Invariably, each one of those members, whether they're an elected official or a member of the public, we would want to make sure they have some level of experience and or expertise associated with either lending or accounting or legal or small business management in general. Again, bring together a very eclectic group of individuals to help make loan decisions, to set policy parameters, and to help guide the process through. The day-to-day activities associated with this particular loan fund would be delegated to the Planning and Development Office. We have experience in our office dealing with a variety of loans, particularly on the housing side, as well as some past experience on the economic development side. So we certainly have staff and expertise and capacity to handle this. But having said that, we would want to lean on other additional internal county staff, whether it would come from financial services or from Corp Counsel's office, as an example, as well as have the ability to lean on external staff, whether that would be an in-kind or through some sort of a contracted arrangement to help make sure that this process is efficient and to make sure that the resources are being spent in a very judicious way, in an expeditious way, to make sure it's not held up in some of the usual and customary roadblocks that sometimes is associated with public funding. So one of the proposals associated that's built into the administrative budget that we're asking for is to have the authority to identify and to utilize third-party system to help accelerate invoicing and loan disbursements. Unlike past, perhaps projects where the old school check approach, where checks were written and dispersed and signed off on, and folks kind of had to be called to find out where those checks were at or in the process, we would use an approved account clearinghouse platform where things would be done electronically. And that would increase a number of efficiencies as well as the accounting associated with this to make it very efficient and allow us to have real-time data on that. So the life cycle of this is this. We hope to have the fund, assuming that there's a favorable vote tonight. Our goal would be to have this fund operational by April 24th, meaning we would have applications available to be accepted online. The application process itself would be 100% online. There would be an electronic document or an application form in a PDF format that would be fillable. Individuals would go ahead and insert their information into that, as well as upload any additional supporting documentation that would be required to go along with the application itself. We would go ahead and process those applications on a rolling basis in the P&D office, identify those that were kind of prepared for the next round of review. They would go to a small review committee that is made up of myself and other individuals throughout the county that have expertise with these types of funds. And then we would bring those recommendations back to the 7-member loan fund committee for review as well as final decision-making on those particular applications. I suspect there will be a strong demand for this, given what's happened at the federal level. As you may be aware, the PPP program, as they call it, the federal level, there was $349 billion allocated for that. As of this morning, 100 billion of that has already been allocated. So you can appreciate there is a strong demand for resources. And the reality is this fund, we hope, again, can be a bridge and or a conduit, and there will be mechanisms built into the processes and procedures to make sure that applicants aren't double dipping from one program into the other and trying to get reimbursement for the same eligible costs. And those eligible costs would certainly fall into the following categories: cover payroll, rent, mortgage interest, utilities, so on and so forth. And again, other eligible uses behind that. The application would be very similar to what applications the SBA and or conventional lenders are using right now. Rather than having a two-step process, which most of the programs have, meaning you go ahead and put in a preliminary application, and then you have to follow up at a later date with chapter and verse. We're going to try to have that all done out of the gate. That way it's a very seamless process. In presumably talking to a number of small businesses throughout the county, many have already made application to one or more programs at the federal level. And so the same basic information that they had to supply and or continuing supplying to further fulfill their application requirements would be nearly identical to what we would be asking for, albeit perhaps in a different format, but same basic information. So we feel the timing is appropriate. We feel the level of information is going to be consistent. One of the questions that surfaced this morning is, the dollar amount. As you might have seen as you read through the resolution, we are capping the maximum loan amount at $20,000. Could we do more? Could we do less? The answer, I think, to both those questions is perhaps yes, and certainly that's a policy-related decision. The reality is we think there's going to be strong demand, and so we're going to attempt to allocate the resources on a very consistent basis, and $20,000 seems to be a fairly standard number that most of these programs across the nation are leaning towards. Some are a little bit lower, some are a touch higher, depending on the size of the marketplace, depending on the number of loans and the number of employee count that they're willing to go up to. As an example, some are only doing microloans, so employees that only have 10 or under, while others are ramping it up to cover folks that have anywhere between 1 and 50 employees. So there's a whole different gamut that it's running, and we think this is right-sized for our community at this point. And certainly the resolution allows the flexibility for the board as well as the loan fund committee to review these particular topics as they move forward to make adjustments. And the reality is the recovery is a little bit to be determined. And, it could be 3 months, could be 6 months, could be 9 months or longer. And as long as there are funds in the current proposal, then we can go ahead and release and make those funds available. If in fact the funds are allocated and there aren't any more funds to draw upon, certainly we would have to stop any new applications from being accepted as well as reviewed. And in the meantime, we would certainly be open to exploring any additional sources, whether they would be local, state, federal, and or philanthropic that might come at some point in the future to help supplement and or recapitalize this fund at a future date. I'll go ahead and take a breath here and allow either county administrator or others to pose questions. So,
Supervisor Fox?
Yeah, where's the money going to come from, and are we prepared to deal with defaults?
So I'll mention where the money's coming from, and then James can mention the defaults piece. So what we proposed in the resolution before you is that there's $1 million towards seed the revolving loan fund, which is coming from our excess sales tax account. There's also $50,000 from that same account that would be for administrative costs that James had referred to. So that's the total amount coming from excess sales tax. So the way to think about the funding piece is that right now we have we're asking for $1,050,000 from that account. There's about $1,093,000 in that account, so there's enough to cover this. The next logical question would be, well, what about all the things that we budgeted for in 2020 that we're not going to have sales tax funding come in for, and how is that going to work? So it's kind of a whichever way you want to think about the money. If we weren't going to spend the excess sales tax money on this proposal, we would probably have it cover unfunded sales tax funded costs for capital projects in 2020. If you agree to use the excess sales tax funding as proposed in this resolution, we would, at some point in the future, we have a little more time, go back and look at our 2020 sales tax funded capital projects and look to make some reductions. The county's association put out a report estimating some scenarios between 7 and 12% essentially reduction in sales tax receipts in 2020 that they expect. We think that's probably a little conservative. We expect it to be higher than 12%. And so we're running some numbers to try to figure out right now kind of what that looks like. And then we've already alerted the department heads, those that have capital projects funded in that way, that we're going to be coming back to them sometime later to talk about whether or not we're going to be able to continue all those projects. So from a funding standpoint, that's the way to think about it as far as what's in the proposal before you. And James, if you want to address the default issue.
Right, so very legitimate question. I think we need to be prepared for some percentage of default. What that percentage is, it may be up to 20 or 25%. Again, that may be a conservative number, or it may be high, but based on other types of public financing, historically, whether it's been local and or across the nation, and given the circumstances associated with this COVID-19 issue, I think we need to be prepared for perhaps probably higher than normal, because these small businesses are going to obviously need a lot of time and quite a bit of runway to recoup and to restart and to strengthen their operations. And we hope that the ability to stack various sources of cash from different resources, again, whether they come from the federal level, state, their commercial lenders, and or perhaps through this fund, with everyone taking a little bit of piece of the action here, hopefully that will give them the stability that they need and the confidence that they need to go ahead and move forward. And hopefully that collective support will be sufficient enough to move folks forward. But I think, again, to answer the question, we need to be prepared from a policymaker standpoint and from certainly a program administration point that there will be defaults. I just don't know what that number is, and certainly we'll have mechanisms built into our processes to make sure that we are tracking and monitoring payments, and those that are going to be challenging out of the gate, there's additional requirements that we could put on those loan recipients. As an example, after we go through their financials and make a determination that they need a little bit of extra help, we could require them to have additional counseling and or mentoring from any number of local and or regional services. What would those be? As an example, the operations manager at the Janesville Innovation Center, that individual is on contract and retainer for our countywide small business and entrepreneurial entrepreneurial development program, we could require that they meet and consult with that individual. We could require that they meet and consult with the folks from UW Whitewater with their Small Business Development Center, as well as other services such as they offer down with G-Beta down at Ironworks in Beloit. So there are additional resources, both predominantly on the technical side of the equation, that we can bring to the table. Will that be sufficient enough to keep folks from going into default? To be determined on that.
And just one follow-up comment would be, should we consider maybe a little bit higher interest rate to maybe, reduce some of our risk? If we do end up with a certain percentage of defaults, 1% on $1 million isn't going to go very far.
Yeah, I think I'll answer, and certainly James can chime in. I think that's a legitimate question, certainly a very good question. We talked a little bit about that, and I think the idea was that, whether it was 1% or 2% or whatever it is, if the goal was to try to, as James described, get the money out the door quickly, try to get it in the hands of the small businesses as quickly as we could. We weren't sure that it was going to make that much of a difference on who was going to, default or not default, or how the success rate was going to be. And so, we're trying to err on the side of not making it a grant necessarily.
Yeah, and that's why I'm asking the questions, because I believe that some of these will effectively become grants. I'm in favor of the program.
Yeah.
It's just this is outside of our normal wheelhouse. We're not a bank, and there's some risks that certainly that we could be facing with an air bubble, a lack of sales tax revenue. Like I said, I'm in favor of it. I'm just want us to be cautious.
Yeah. So that's something the board could talk about, is that, whether or not that 1% is the right number, or, we can certainly explore that some more.
Other discussion?
Yes. Bob Yeomans, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Bob. Go ahead, Supervisor Yeomans.
Thank you. I wanted to say I thank you, Josh, for recognizing that our sales tax receipts for the year 2020 will be substantially down. I noticed that there's a fiscal bureau at the state level that says it'll be anywhere between 8 and 15%. And you mentioned that we could solve some of that deficit by reducing capital expenses that we'd allocated in 2020. It's my recollection that we also use sales taxes for some of our operating expenses. And have you had any thoughts about reducing some of those, the sales tax parts of those? I know that we're going to use sales tax to supplement some perhaps additional employee costs for the sheriff's department and some other things. Has there been any attempt to let the department heads know that they should start being a little bit more fiscally conservative than maybe the budget gave them, so that we could deal with that through operation expense reductions as well?
Yeah, so the Supervisor Yeomans is correct. Right now, there's just about a 50-50 split. We may have actually, on our collections, gone a little bit over. So there's about $7 million. Sherry could probably give you the exact number of sales tax and operations. The rest is in capital. We as far as the operations go, I think the reason that I frame it as reductions in capital is it's just administratively easier. The operations is kind of an operations, and it's always hard to know how to, unless you're going to reduce people, where exactly you're going to make those savings in the operational budget. Whereas the capital expenditures, that are budgeted on a spreadsheet, and it's a lot easier to go through and put a halt to some of them. Not that they wouldn't be painful in some areas, but at least it's easier. So that's why I framed it that way. As far as what we expect the operational budget to look like due to the COVID situation, it's hard to say at this point. I think there's departments where expenditures are just naturally down right now because they're not providing services and they're not spending money on certain things they might spend money on. Staffing is our biggest cost, and so that's a discussion for later in the agenda as well. I think that at the same time, some of our operational expenditures are going to be up significantly in certain areas related to the response, in ways that once we get a list of kind of those purchases, I'll be reporting back to the board, possibly your next meeting. to begin to share what some of those costs might be. But operational budget, I think, is just a bigger question mark at this point than the capital budget would be with regard to sales tax collections. We've already told the department heads. We've had weekly department meetings, and I've given them advance notice that we wouldn't necessarily expect that our net new construction number will be very good next year. We'll expect sales tax to be down, and so not really to expect any new money in the budget for next year, when typically we'd start our 2021 budget process with some HR communications in early May. So timely questions about what's going to happen both to 2020 and 2021 budgets, but at this point, that's kind of how we're approaching it.
May I have a follow-up question, please?
Yes.
Okay. What are the expectations of the county getting reimbursed for some of their additional expenses because of the virus from either the state or federal government?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they seem to change. Over the past several weeks, they've changed. So, for example, initially FEMA's guidance was that they would reimburse 75%. They'd expect the state to reimburse 12.5%, and locals would be responsible for 12.5% of certain costs that were eligible. However, there was no guarantee that you'd get any of that. So sort of track your expenses and see what happens. Some other programs, since we've heard, are qualifying at 100%. And it's just hard to say really right now, given that it's such a chaotic environment. So what we're doing is tracking expenditures. Another example would be, related to this would be personal protective equipment. We know there's such a shortage right now. So the county EOC is attempting to try to buy as much PPE as possible in large quantities, both for county needs and for our local partners' needs. Also, our municipalities are kind of doing the same thing. We're trying to coordinate that, but so there's various shifting that might be done. We might make a large purchase. For example, today we tried to make a large purchase of N95 masks, which we hope to get early next week. Some of that might be for us, some might be for local municipalities, in which case we might charge them back. And then how does that reimbursement work? We're just not quite sure yet. So what we're doing right now is we're just tracking everything, and some expenses we just have to make right now, like the PPE, attempts to buy PPE. And then I think the chips are going to fall where they may at some point, and we're just going to hope to get back as much as we can.
Okay, thank you. One other, if just to keep going with that, if we're spending a lot of additional money buying PPEs, is that higher on the priority list or lower on the priority list to giving loans to small businesses?
Well, I think that's.
Can we afford to do both, I guess?
Yeah, so that's the question in front of you. So the way I think about it is, if I were to have to choose in the moment, I'd say PPE is more important than small business loans, for reasons that I think Supervisor Baumkamp could speak to very well about first responders and our nursing home staff and all sorts of things like that. I think that the reason that I think that both are doable, different funding sources, probably first of all, and that's why I think, as some have alluded to with regard to small business loans, that the reason that we recommended the sales tax was because of a recognition that these small businesses really result in us receiving the sales tax in the first place, and so it seemed like a good use for that. But the other thing I guess I would point out, is that we've got a healthy, I would say, a very healthy general fund balance. Our undesignated fund balance, Sherry can certainly speak to what that number is right now, but over $30 million in the past 5 years. This is the numbers that I'd given to you during the budget process in the fall. We're over the last 5 years, between 2014 and 2018, which is the numbers we had at the time. We've put more than $5 million into that undesignated general fund balance, and so I'm not sure that there's been many rainier days in some of our careers than there is right now. And so I think that's a longer answer to, I think that we should be doing both of these things.
Thank you, Supervisor Yeomans. We're in uncharted waters, and we're going to kind of have to go by day. As soon as James would like to meet, I will get Josh and James and myself together. We'll put this committee together. I think we should do it sooner rather than later, if you approve this, and I will make the appointments, and I think we should get them going. Any other comments?
Yes, I would like to make an amendment to this and say that the interest rate should be 2% instead of 1%. That would, if everybody paid back their loans, that would give us another $20,000 to loan back to somebody else. It would cover the cost of one default.
Do you think it would be more appropriate to let the committee make that decision?
Oh, okay. I thought the resolution had to make the decision. If the committee can make that decision, I'm fine.
The
with
committee will have wide-ranging authority.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other discussion? Supervisor Thomas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just curiously, when does the Alliant Energy money come, and would that help us out in this situation?
Yeah, good question. So Alliant Energy money would be planning to come in 2021 budget. And so that, that is one resource we'd have available to us to use for this or other purposes. It's interesting how, at one point we were trying to itemize things that, we hadn't been able to accomplish maybe in past years and target some of that funding for. And now with our reduced funding, that'll maybe go to a different purpose. But yes, 2021 budget is when we'll start to see that.
We don't get the money the year that they open. It's the year following that we get the revenue from Alliant. There's also the possibility that the casino will get the green light to go. It's sitting on the Bureau of Indian Affairs director in Washington, and all he has to do is sign it. So that could come any day. I have no idea whether it will. I don't think any of us do. And I don't think Lori has contacted you, Josh, about it, has she lately?
No, I don't have any update on that.
But there's another possible source. But any other discussion on this a motion to establish a small business loan fund? I will meet with James and Josh at the earliest possible time to get this committee put together.
I think Supervisor Rashkin has a question.
Supervisor Rashkin, and then Supervisor Baumkamp.
So very, very good questions. I'll start with the first question in terms of the accountability and transparency. So there'll be very frequent reports that'll be run by our office and or by the third party ACH platform that we're intending to subcontract with. That information will be shared in real time with the loan fund committee so they can see exactly where the portfolio is at any given time in terms of some of the detailed criteria and weighting of that. So today, a small group of us got together to talk about those particular decisions and how they would be reviewed accordingly. And we've proposed to put together a schematic that essentially has 5 equally weighted buckets that will be 20 points apiece, for lack of a better word. So each of those 5 categories will carry 20 points, and those points will help determine certain dollar amounts associated with each loan request that comes through. Clearly, the application itself from the individuals will require detailed information, not only year to date, but more importantly, they have to compare where they were a year ago to date. And then more importantly, we're going to force them and ask them to look forward. Where do they anticipate to see themselves? Obviously, middle or end of second quarter, moving into third quarter, fourth quarter, so on and so forth. So there's a schematic that we've put together. Certainly, we will share that. and look for guidance and input from the loan fund committee, assuming that this resolution is approved, and make whatever modifications are deemed necessary at that point. But our intent is to have a very consistent process, very transparent, that applicants can feel that they've gotten their fair shake, so to speak, on a one-on-one basis in terms of how their information stacks up to applicant A versus B, so on and so forth. Yeah, certainly, the ratios of where they're at in terms of assets and liabilities, how their cash flow looked a year ago, year to date, compared to where it's at. Those that have payroll and rent obligations at a certain level compared to others, certainly there's going to take into account other financial issues that are in their documentation. And so, again, it's that rubrics is a bit in flux right now because we're moving very rapidly, but it doesn't mean that there won't be due diligence conducted on putting that rubrics together. And I don't have the exact weighting criteria or the buckets necessarily spec'd or vetted out in a granular format, but we have broad sweeping parameters that we discussed today, and certainly each and every day moving forward, those are going to continue to crystallize. And then we will present those to the loan fund committee for their consideration and advice and counsel on that.
Supervisor Bonkamp, did you have a question? Go ahead. Oh.
Well, I'll start with that one, and James can certainly chime in. So I think the idea of the 7-member committee was structured so that there's still a 4 county board members, so there's still accountability from the board, even through that small business loan committee back to the planning and development committee, and that those 4 individuals, as you're indicating, I think we'd want to choose carefully people both from those 4 and the 3 community members who have some expertise in this area or some insight into how this might work. So that there is, again, some professional thought brought to just the questions that you're asking, Supervisor Rashkin. And I think that's why having the 3 members from the community, and certainly I think we'd look at James based on his knowledge of who's in the community that has this kind of expertise to make some suggestions to Chair Podzolny about who might be good people to serve on that committee. And timing-wise, we'd expect that probably your next meeting on the 2 weeks from today, I guess, we'd expect those appointments to come to you. So right now we don't exactly know who's going to be on the county board at that meeting. So on your agenda for later tonight is a discussion of how you want the reorganizational meeting to go on the 21st. But if Lisa is able to have the board canvas meet next week, as she's planning to, and those results can be certified, we would have about a week to know who your new colleagues are going to be. And as we're getting the agenda out about a week in advance, and again, maybe we're in another situation where we can't quite get that agenda out right as we usually like to, then we'd have at least the body of folks from whom to choose that the chair could consider for that committee. I think you're right. Yeah, I think we wait. Would wait to have that discussion with the chair until we knew who the new county board was going to be after the board of canvas meets next week.
Supervisor Bonkamp.
The first question is for James, and then the second one will be for Josh. So is this going to be in conjunction with the federal grant? Is that going to have any part to play with this, whether they got it or not? I'm not quite sure how that one works. And then the second question is, $1 million, I agree we need this program. $1 million a lot, but would this take away from employees' payroll, the ones that are getting furloughed or anything? I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit later on, but it might make a decision on how people vote, whether we're able to pay our employees that aren't able to work from home. I hate to see them be left out of this also. Are we going to spend too much money on this and not be able to afford to pay the employees that workforce. Our internal customers are just as important as our external customers.
James, you want to go first?
Sure. So on the application process itself, the applicant will need to identify what other forms of state and or local or conventional financing they've applied for, what the status of that application is, and what the uses of those funds are intended for. And so we want to identify and qualify and quantify that to make sure that we're not double dipping and jumping on top of another source that's dedicated, to another use, and so on and so forth. And so certainly that would back to Supervisor Raskin's question about some of the rubrics that we're putting together. That would come into play in the weighting system to see, what gaps still exist on their sources and uses, and can that gap be covered by our fund, or will it presumably be covered by somebody else's fund?
And then on the question of priorities, so that's a good question. I think the way I see it is they're entirely independent of each other. So we'll certainly discuss the resolution later about funding for our workforce. But if I would say, if the board passes this resolution and then would decide not to pass the resolution later, they're really independent of each other. The sales tax funding that we're proposing for this project, in any case, we wouldn't be proposing that be used to backfill employee wages, for example. With a split, we've been frozen on using our sales tax for operations. We haven't increased that since 2011 over that $7 million amount, and it wouldn't be my recommendation to do that now. I think, they're just, I think what happens to your resolution later on the workforce funding, we'd have a different solution if you turn that down versus using these dollars for that purpose. We would bring something back as far as an entirely different solution, I think. So that's maybe a longer answer than you're expecting, but as a way of saying you don't feel like you need to weigh those two things against each other, and we can certainly explain more about that later on when we talk about that resolution.
Go ahead, Supervisor Bonkamp.
Okay, no, it's thank you. I'm good.
Are there other questions? Any more debate on this amendment, or this motion? If not, this is roll call. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Here. Supervisor Pierce still on?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm in favor. Yes.
Eggeter?
Yes.
Beaver?
Yes.
Potter?
Yes.
Mulwiney?
Yes.
Fox?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes.
Christina?
Yes.
Bussey? Is Supervisor Bussey still here?
She's still on.
I'll come back to see if she can get her her mic on. Davis?
I vote yes.
Thank you. Davis? Is Wes still with us? Thomas?
Yes.
Knutson?
Yes.
Holman? Dave?
Yes.
Raskin?
Yes.
Gramke?
Yes.
Yeomans?
Yes.
Levy?
Yes.
Brill?
Yes.
Scholes? I know she said yes, her volume, she can't get up, but she emailed me. Zajac?
Yes.
Bostwick?
Yes.
Sweeney?
Yes.
Baumkamp?
Yes.
Owens?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Pudzilny?
Yes.
And then is Davis on or not?
Yes.
Thank you. 26 yes, 3 absent. 0 no.
Motion carried. Next item, please.
Next item, item 12B, contracts, 12B1, authorization for 911 telephone system servicer replacement.
Owens, move it.
Beaver second.
Peterson,
Moved and seconded. Supervisor Beaver, do you have any comments on this?
Well, I think the executive summary has it all summed up, but I don't know if there's questions, and I don't know if Kathy's on or Dara, if there is questions.
Kathy and Dara are both on. Kathy, do you want to provide any comments, or Dara?
Basically, it's just a replacement of equipment that we purchased 7 years ago that's due for replacement for the backroom servers, new reporting for the phone system, and then training for our IT staff who maintains the system for us.
Other questions?
Mr. Chair, if while people are deciding if they have questions, Kathy, do you want to provide a quick update on other 911 equipment moves while you have the floor?
Sure. Well, as all of you have probably seen, some of our police and fire departments do with the COVID social distancing and coming up with different ways to separate staff, and so that we don't have everybody fall sick at one time. We have really struggled because of the setup that we have at the 911 center and the way everybody, if you've ever been there, how we fit 3 people or 2 to 3 people to what we call a pod. So we made changes. We're kind of making incremental changes where we separated people. We thought about going to the Beloit Township backup site, like a lot of 911 centers are doing, sending part of their staff to their backup site. However, when it was designed, I don't think anybody really thought of a pandemic where the EMS is living in that building. So we did not think that that was a good place to put our people and expose them. And the health department agreed. So our backup site, unfortunately, was not an option. We purchased partitions recently to put between people. And so we're working on that. But we recently came up with some ideas of having remote making an alternate site at a site that's not our backup site, and that is to move part of our staff over to Rock County Highway into their new conference room. So we thought of this last week, and IT and General Communications, who does our radio system, jumped on it, thankfully, and Dewey is very generous to give us his new room before he's really used it. But we have moved all of our CAD equipment, which is a computer-aided dispatch, hooked it up to the county network. We moved our radio system, it's on the county network, but we unfortunately can't move our phone system over there. So we have just purchased, as of today, we issued a PO for an emergency purchase of remote 911 call take positions. They're VPN laptop positions that will hook into our 911 phone system so that we can move staff until further notice over to the highway department and separate them from the other staff in case someone were to get ill, and so they can have proper social distancing. So those are due to come in a couple of weeks, and we started working out of the backup site or the alternate site at about 3 o'clock today. So thanks to everybody for helping and thinking outside of the box.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy. Questions? Any supervisors with questions or comments? If not, again, this is roll call. Please vote.
Pierre?
Yes.
Eggeter?
Yes.
Beaver?
Yes.
Potter?
Yes.
Mulwiney?
Yes.
Fox?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes.
Christina?
Yes.
Bussey?
Yes.
Yes.
Davis?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yes.
Knudsen?
Yes.
Holman?
Yes.
Rashkin? Gramke?
Yes.
Yeomans?
Yes.
Levy?
Yes.
Brill?
Yes.
Schultz? Zajac?
Yes.
Bostwick?
Yes.
Sweeney?
Yes.
Baumkamp?
Yes.
Owens?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Pudzilny?
Yes.
I am not sure. I'm guessing Kathy said yes. I was a little faint when I heard her. "26 yes, 0 no, 3 absent.
Motion carried. Next item, please.
Next item, 12B2, authorizing Rock County Department of Public Works to replace asphalt parking lot at UW Whitewater at Rock County and crack seal other Rock County owned facilities parking lots as needed.
I'll move this, Jeremy.
Moved by Supervisor Zajac, seconded by
Supervisor Potter.
Supervisor Potter. Is Brent Sutherland here with us?
Yes, I am. Russ.
Would you like to comment on what we're doing here?
Yes, this is again a resolution. We just started doing this about 3 years ago. Last year, Supervisor Yeoman asked us to do an analysis on if it's more economic doing it in-house versus external. And that analysis showed, again, it was quite a bit of substantial savings doing it in-house. So we're looking to have Public Works again do some of our asphalt repairs and crack sealing. And currently we're looking at this year for asphalt top coating is the parking lot behind in the engineering department. We already did the front and down the aisle. We just need to come around the back. And then some of our sites, there's multiple different sites we'll be doing the crack sealing, and that's based on a cost per linear foot.
Any questions of Brent? Further discussion? Again, this is roll call. Please vote.
Here?
Yes.
Eggeter?
Yes.
Seaver?
Yes.
Potter?
Yes.
Mulwiney?
Yes.
Fox?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes.
Gustina?
Yes.
Bussey?
Yes.
Davis?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yes.
Knutson?
Yes.
Holman? Dave Holman? Rashkin? Gramke?
Yes.
Yeomans?
Yes.
Levy?
Yes.
Brill? Schultz? Zajac?
Yes.
Bostwick?
Yes.
Yes.
Sweeney?
Yes.
Baumkamp?
Yes.
Owens?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Pudzilny?
Yes.
Can I verify Holman?
Yes.
26 yes, 0 no, 3 absent.
Motion carried.
Yes.
Supervisor Schultz, did you want to weigh in here? Next item, Lisa.
Next item, 12B3, authorizing renewal of Microsoft Enterprise Agreement.
Mary moves it.
Moved by Supervisor Mulwiney. Seconded by Supervisor Fox. Supervisor Mulwiney?
I'll call on either Dara or James.
Hi, this is James. Yes, in April 2014, Rock County entered into an enterprise agreement with Microsoft as part of a state contract for network infrastructure and desktop application software. The terms of that agreement require a renewal every 3 years to maintain the favorable pricing and to obtain the most current software versions available. This agreement allows the county to keep all the county desktop applications and the most up-to-date software available, as well as to consolidate on a same platform. The strategy allows for a more streamlined approach to software management, and it allows IT staff a uniform suite of products for not only Microsoft software, but also software supported by Microsoft and utilized by the county, such as Citrix remote desktop software, which has been an integral part of the county's remote workforce initiative during this COVID-19 pandemic. The Microsoft Enterprise Agreement will span the budget years of 2020 to 2023 with 3 equal payments of $402,392.67. And we procured via CDWG. Pending your questions.
Questions? Any questions from supervisors? Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, this is roll call. Please vote.
Peer, Eggeter,
Yes.
Beaver,
Yes.
Potter,
Yes.
Winnie,
Yes.
Fox,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
Christina,
Yes.
Bussey,
Yes.
Davis,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Knudsen,
Yes.
Holman,
Yes.
Rashkin, Gramke,
Yes.
Holman,
Yes.
Levy,
Yes.
Brill,
Yes.
Schultz, Zajac,
Yes.
Bostwick,
Yes.
Yes.
Baumkamp,
Yes.
Owens,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Pudzilny.
Yes,
26 yes, 0 no, 3 absent.
motion carried. Next item, please.
Item 12C, authorizing application with Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources for snowmobile grant funds.
I move it.
Moved by Supervisor Bussey.
Second,
by
Jeremy.
Supervisor Owens. Supervisor Bussey.
This is a grant that we apply, a snowmobile grant that we apply for every year for the money.
Any questions?
Sweeney has a question.
Supervisor Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Has the 2019-2020 closeout payment been made?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, I can ask John on tomorrow for that. One point of clarification on the executive summary. This past spring, winter, the Snowmobile Alliance and a local snowmobile club have parted ways. So Rock County is going to have to get creative in dividing that accordingly between those two entities.
Further questions, further discussion? If not, again, roll call. Please call, will the clerk please call the roll? I know this is cumbersome to do it this way, but.
I don't believe this one requires a roll call. Is that correct?
Oh, you're right. You're right. This does not. Ah, thank goodness. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Motion carried. Next item, please.
Next item, 12D, establishing temporary pay leave for COVID-19 related workforce reductions and policy on furlonged employees.
Moved by Mawiney.
Moved by Supervisor Mulwiney,
Second by Thomas.
seconded by Supervisor Thomas.
I'll
Josh,
start. I'll start if you like.
I think I should start with you. Thank you.
Sure, and I would, ask Rich and Annette to chime in as they've been working hard on this as well. So just as a reminder of what we've been doing over the last several weeks, we've communicated to you different types of leave that have become available through the federal government. We refer to the FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and that created some federal benefits, and we've described those to you before in some communications. The intent of this resolution is to create a leave program to cover a segment of our workforce that has not been covered by some of the federal programming. So as you recall from prior conversations, the federal program is really intended to cover two different kinds of situations. One is to provide an 80-hour leave bank for individuals who are either ill, caring for someone who's ill in that same kind of category related to COVID-19 leave, and then as well to cover folks who might be at home caring for their kids because school is out. And in addition, it creates an additional 10 weeks of leave under the FMLA for families, parents, employees whose children are home from school. And so in that situation, as you may recall, they can earn 2/3 of their normal rate of pay, capped at $200 per day, up to $10,000. So what is left out of what the federal government did is covering some sort of leave for our healthy workforce who may not have to stay home and watch their kids, but who might have a reduced workload. So out of equity, we were trying to think about a way to put together a program that mirrored what the federal government had done to provide a benefit to that category of employees. And so that's what this does for you today. So it would be similar in as much as providing the same sort of leave period for individuals, and then they could receive essentially 2/3 of their pay for a period of time and then make up the 1/3 through using leave balances that they may have available, not including sick leave unless they're sick. And that way then it would kind of round out a group of employees that may have a need to have some sort of program for them. One of the reasons that we really wanted to think about creating this kind of program for this group is that as we're doing some planning ahead and we're anticipating that there's going to be a segment of our workforce that is going to be unavailable because they're going to get sick or workload's going to increase in certain departments. For those folks in our workforce that might have a reduced workload, whether it's zero workload, a reduced workload, maybe they can do part of their job from home, maybe they can't really do any work from home. We wanted to keep them in a queue, really, that we could call them back quickly to cover these absent employees or an increased workload in other departments, even potentially. And as I note in the executive summary here, even potentially community roles where we would continue to pay our staff, but to go out into the community to serve in certain functions that are essential to our clients and the community. So that's the first segment that this resolution would cover. The final segment would be the temporary furlough program. Again, we were trying to think of what might all segments of our workforce want to take advantage of or need to take advantage of. And so given the increased unemployment benefits that the federal government provided, it is possible that some of our workforce who might have reduced workload might actually be better off by taking a furlough and taking advantage of that unemployment benefit that the federal government has indicated needs to be provided. And so we wanted to create carve out a program for those people and just again, could be maybe no one will take advantage of that. Unique circumstances might want to. But again, the goal here was to try to round out something to cover most, if not all, of the situations we could think about that our workforce might need to take advantage of. And then there's some provisions here as well. We can talk about that. The details what we've actually, it's kind of a unique situation. What we've done in this resolution is ask you to direct me to issue an administrative order to implement this. After talking about how we would do that, we felt that was the cleanest way because the administrative orders end at a certain point in time in the future versus if the board is creating new policies in the manual, then we have to go back and undo those at some point when the emergency is over. So we thought that was probably the cleanest way to do it. A little unique, but that's what's in front of you. I'm sure there's more to answer about this as far as the effect on the budget, but I'll let you go ahead and ask questions at this point.
Questions?
I have a couple.
Supervisor Bonkamp, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So currently, what's going on with people? I mean, is DPW working at all? Are they? I mean, it looks like seal coating or whatever is coming up in construction. They are essential then, or I mean,
Yep.
how's that working? And then also, are you cross training? So if it does go through a department, someone's going to be able to step in to do. Won't be as efficient, but at least be able to answer phones, whatever needs to be done in some of the departments that are necessary.
Yep. So good question. So the first one I'll answer, DPW is a good example. So until such a time that we had a program in place for our reduced workload individuals, we have not we've not laid them off, but consistent with wanting to flatten the curve and not have people out working. We at this point in this time we're paying everybody who has reduced workload their full salaries. We've not reduced their salaries yet for work that if they're not able to do work. And DPW is a great example. So for example, the governor's order, the Safer at Home order, had public works as essential. And so we could make a decision to have public works be out working, and some of them are, certainly for reasons you can imagine. We need to be on call for emergencies or other things that need to be maintained. But again, I think that the decision at the time was we felt the public health need to keep people at home outweighed the need to bring the staff in at the moment, that we could get by a little bit with a reduced workload. And so we continued to pay them their wage until these decisions were made about what kind of COVID-19 specific benefits might be available to them. And so under this plan, we continue to keep those public works staff at home for a little while longer, hoping to suppress the curve more. And then at the time when Dewey and the team over there decide that either A, they need to bring them back, which part of them have had to come back even in this interim time period for various things, or when it's okay to send them out to do seal coating, as you suggest, with appropriate personal distancing measures in place, they'd be able to do that. So that's the status of the workforce pay right now. As far as your question about redeployment of staff, it's hard to know exactly who to begin to train because we just don't know who's going to be out and sick and who's going to be called in to provide coverage. But the principles we've talked about are the example that you gave was a good one about administrative assistance, for example. So we need somebody to answer the phone. So we thought if we're going to redeploy somebody, it might be somebody in we use land conservation, for example. There's a staff member there who does clerical duties. Might she be able to be redeployed to the sheriff's office to do some clerical duties, answer the phones, provide a minimum level of coverage. We thought the skill set match is really what we're going for. Not knowing exactly how we could do cross training yet, not knowing who's going to be sick and who might be available to cover for them based on their workload.
Did you have a follow-up, Supervisor Bonkamp?
Yeah, just one more. So if they do, it could be their choice. I guess there's more than one question. If they do furlough, that'd be their choice, like a DPW. If they don't feel safe coming into work, they could do that if they wanted, 2/3 pay or whatever, or they could work. What about then everybody takes it, and are they on call then? Are they, then there's a storm that comes through.
Yep.
What are you going to do then?
Yep. So a good question, because it draws a distinction between sort of the temporary paid leave policy, which is the first part of the resolution, and the furlough policy, which would be the second part. So the furlough would be much more like kind of more like a temporary layoff, like you think about. And the usual layoff rules would apply about calling people back. The reason that we wanted to create a temporary program was that anybody who would be at home taking advantage of that sort of that 2/3 compensation would still be on the payroll. The advantage of that from the callback perspective is that they're much more easily interchangeable with callback and then back on leave versus if somebody's on unemployment and you call them back, then there's a lot of bureaucratic processes in place. And we thought that was going to impede the flexibility of calling people back. And so one of the provisions that we would have in this resolution as part of the administrative order would be that if someone is home on a temporary paid leave program and they're getting 2/3 of their wages paid, that if we ask them to come back because they were needed either certainly in their current job. So in your example about DPW, if there's a storm and they need to come back and clean up, they would be required to come back. And if they refuse to come back, then they wouldn't any longer be eligible for that 2/3 program. They'd have to take full 100% leave time to stay at home. So that was what our thinking was about incentivizing people to be able to come back, certainly to the job they're in, and even to the extent of if there's a skills match like the clerical example, we would expect them to come back. And we'd have a process in place that if there was a skills match there and we need them to come back, we'd expect them to come back even if it wasn't to their job. And if they refused, we'd go through a process with HR to make sure that there really was a match and there wasn't any sort of example, a disability accommodation that they couldn't perform that job. And if they were unable or if they were unwilling to do that, then that'd be like the DPW example where then they'd be off the 2/3 program and be on a full-time leave.
Okay, one more follow-up and then I'll be done. So the ones that take the furlough that may go on unemployment, get their benefits, would they still stay under the healthcare plan or would they lose their healthcare plan if they did that?
I think we've talked about that many ways. Rich, can you answer that question of what we talked about?
And Annette maybe can chime in too if she has something to add. So right now, the way our plan design is currently constructed, an individual has to work 20 hours in a 2-week period in order to be eligible to stay on the health insurance. The way that works out, my understanding is that an individual, say, goes on an unpaid leave term, either on disability, under our current set of rules, disability or some other kind of unpaid leave circumstance. And it would be actually 4 weeks until that would get triggered because you would wait 2 weeks and then there'd be like a 2-week kind of calculating period. And then they would drop off the insurance after 4 weeks. That would be how we would anticipate the temporary furlough program working as well. Since it's a contractual arrangement in our plan design, it's one of the sort of powers we lost not being self-insured anymore, is now we have to follow those obligations in the plan design, which require 20 hours of work in a 2-week period from our employees.
Annette, do you have anything you want to add to that? No. So I would just add to what Rich said that, again, as we're trying to think about things and wrap around all of our employees, one of the reasons we're offering the temporary paid leave program for you is that we were trying to figure out ways that people could keep their insurance benefits in this time when they're probably as important as ever to families. And there would be, and that's why when I referenced the temporary furlough program earlier, I'm not sure who would want to even take advantage of that because it'd have to be somebody who maybe is not on our insurance, maybe has a spouse who had their insurance through, and they could again not be subject necessarily to losing their insurance. And so I think that's a good way to think about one of the distinctions between those two is the temporary paid leave program keeps them on the payroll, anticipates that they're still on the insurance program. Temporary furlough program would be a narrower group who would be wanting to go on unemployment and then potentially, as Rich described, losing their insurance over a longer period of time.
Okay, thank you.
Until they come back.
Other discussion, other questions? Annette, did you want to weigh in on anything here?
I think that this resolution really demonstrates to our employees that we value them and we know that this is a situation that none of us anticipated. And it's a way to help our employees have a menu of options that they can choose that's best suited for them and their family, so that when this situation comes to a resolution where people can come back to work, our employees are situated to a return to an employer that valued them. So I really think from a message that we're sending to the employees, we are sending a message that you are valued and we're doing what we can to support you through this crisis, and we're ready for you to return to work when we are able to, have the environment where they can.
And I guess one last thing I would mention is that, and I know this is a point Sherry brought up during staff committee. I don't know if Sherry's on the call still or not, but thinking about Supervisor Baumkamp, you asked earlier about how does this really affect the county's budget and funding, and a couple ways to just a couple things to keep in mind there. From a budgetary standpoint, we've already budgeted funds to pay all these folks. And so, it's possible there might be a slight savings for some portion of the workforce if they go down to 2/3. Supervisor Yeoman's question earlier is sort of related to that as well about operational budget savings. Also, because we're a direct payee, I think that's the right term on that there for unemployment. We pay directly the unemployment costs as well. So by putting out our employees on layoff and taking advantage of unemployment, we're not really going to save money in the sort of the short-term time period here, because we're going to be paying their wages either way. So that, again, it's much easier to keep them on the payroll if we can, to have that flexibility. Did I describe that correctly, Annette?
Yeah, we're direct payee on the state. It is yet to be determined on the federal supplement.
Thank you.
Further discussion or further questions? If not,
yes, sir.
We're not going to vote. We don't have to vote on this, so I'm going to ask, does the question get called?
Looks like Supervisor Holman has a question.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I think Supervisor Holman might have a question.
Supervisor Holman, do you have a question?
Yes. The question I have is the things that we're talking about here. We don't want to damage our employees, and I understand that the goal is to make sure we treat them right. This is not their fault. None of this is. So I just want to make sure that it's a long haul, that we do not damage our employees financially because of something that was not any of their faults or unexpected by anybody in this world to have to deal with. And that's my biggest concern right now. There's a lot of employees out there that are really right now on the tip of our boat going to be affected, whether pro or con of what we do. And this is my concern. It sounds good in the front end, but I worry about it in the back end. Where are these employees going to get this? Is this going to work for them? How, in the end of the day, are they going to be okay and not harmed?
Yeah, so I think, that's a good point. It raises another issue that I should mention. So as we're trying to determine what to craft here to bring to you for your approval, we weighed the balance between the things I mentioned before about wanting to be flexible in redeployment if we needed to, as a public service body, needing to make sure that we were able to do that, wanting to take care of our employees, as we mentioned, either from vacation standpoint or a wage standpoint, in a way that they continue to function, be supportive of continuing to support the local economy in those ways, but also balanced with what you're seeing in the community right now, where there's a lot of layoffs and unemployment is very, very high and increasing nationwide, and wanting to try to have that balance and be fair to the public, who many of whom might be losing their jobs. And so, in the end, what we felt that balance was is that we had a defensible argument to make in mirroring what the federal government had done, with the FFCRA and the 2/3 pay program for really over the 12 weeks of time, that was recognizing all the things that we want to do for our workforce and for continued operations, as well as recognizing that it didn't seem quite equitable either to pay people their full wages if they weren't doing work, given what's going on in the local economy and workforce. So that was the balance we were trying to strike, Supervisor Holman, with why we structured it as we did in bringing it to you. And certainly that's all up for debate and discussion on your part. It's I think for the most part, and again, our employees really aren't aware of this yet in this level of detail. I hope that they would see that balance in continue to pay them a portion of their wages for a period of time, and allowing them to keep their insurance, but still recognizing the reality in the workforce out there in the private sector.
Other questions?
I have one more.
Supervisor Bonkamp?
Would this affect any the ones you are collectively bargaining with? Is there any departments out there that would be affected by this where it interferes with their contract?
Rich, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we have 3 collectively bargained units still. We have the Correctional Officers Association, the Deputy Sheriff's Association, and the Deputy Sheriff Supervisors Association. All 3 have bargained paid leave programs, whether it's sick leave or vacation or other kinds of comp time and things like that. It does not affect the availability of any of those benefits that they might have. And at this point, quite frankly, there's no view that any of those units will be at home not having any kind of work to do. So the likelihood that they would meet the qualifications for this paid leave program are incredibly minuscule. If they did, I think we'd have to make a determination at that time, and negotiate and talk to the union about how that was going to weave into their collectively bargained agreement.
I would add to that similar in principle, when you may remember we had these conversations about the federal program. I sent you out communications about the order that implemented the federal FFCRA programs upon which this program is modeled, and it allowed some exemptions for certain essential staff. So all 3 of those bargained units were in that essential group, and so we did choose to carve them out of the 12 weeks of childcare leave because we felt we couldn't have any of those people and others that we carved out absent from the workforce for that period of time. But we did leave them the benefit, all of our employees, the benefit of being able to take advantage of that 80 hours of paid sick leave if they got ill or were caring for somebody that was ill at home. And so in that way, we're trying to recognize give them as many benefits as we could. And so I think that's recognizing sort of the principle we'd invoke if we had a situation like Rich talked about where there was some reason that they'd need to take advantage of that. We certainly would want to work with them to let them take advantage of that to the extent we could in the bargaining process.
Further discussion? Further questions? If not, I'm going to call for a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed with no. Motion carried. Next item, please.
Next item, 12E, authorizing submission of 2020 body worn camera policy and implementation program to support law enforcement agencies.
Moved by Beaver.
Moved by Supervisor Beaver.
Seconded by Supervisor Potter.
Seconded by Supervisor Potter. Supervisor Beaver.
The sheriff has put in for a grant to get $40,000 for some body cameras for his deputies. There is a $40,000 match. It can be in money or in kind. So I think it's an awesome thing, and if they get it, it'll be awesome.
Questions? Discussion?
Supervisor Davis, I have a question about how many body cameras would that be?
That is a great question.
Well, I'm trying to read it too.
Is it in the executive summary? I don't think it is it?
Nope.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it here either.
Mm-mm.
I guess we'll have to find out and get back to you on that.
And also, are there other body cameras worn now that are similar?
So I can answer that one. We currently don't have a body camera program. All of our cameras are the dash cams that are in the squads. So this would be the first foray into body cams. Sheriff's Department's talked about doing this for years and has been not as eager to jump in as letting some of the body cam policies and things get kind of ironed out before they got in. So we didn't budget for it in 2020, as you can see from the resolution. But the intent is, as Supervisor Beaver indicated, this grant became available. And so they thought to take advantage of the grant for $40,000, that now might be the time to jump in and try it out. And it just requires that additional match that, as Sherry noted in her note, we'd have to bring a resolution back to you to actually amend the budget for that match if the grant is received.
Thank you.
I have a question, Chair.
Go ahead.
About the having to do a resolution for the extra $40,000. Are they not planning on doing any of it in kind so that we don't have to take the $40,000 of the general fund?
So right now they're intending to want cash from us for that. That's what the is indicated in the executive summary. Whether that might change before they get once they get the resolution, I don't know. But that's their current plan, is to come back and ask you for $40,000 from the general fund to be the match.
I would hope that we would do something in kind and save the $40,000 for something else. I know in the past they have done the in kind and not the hard cash. So maybe it's something we need to ask them about.
Yep, that's a good point. I don't know what what I don't know is what the rules are about what qualifies as in kind match here. If it's different than we do usually in those kinds of things, but that'd be certainly a point to follow up on the sheriff's office.
Mawiney has a question.
Supervisor Mawiney.
Thank you. We've always talked about the cameras and things like that, but what about storage? Do we have sufficient space to store this and things to do that with?
Right, so storage is not included it's not covered by the grant funds. Storage has always been something that, that's been one of the reasons that we haven't jumped into this, is because the storage sometimes get more expensive, than the body cams themselves. It's been some while since we talked about what that might look like. But to directly answer your question, storage is not included and would be additional cost down the road that we would have to budget for if we were going to end up moving in this direction.
Do you have any idea what that would be, roughly?
Boy, I don't know. I see that Jim is on the phone. I don't know if he has any sense at all about server costs for storing video for body cams at all, or body cams.
Yeah, I don't at this time. We could certainly get that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Further discussion? If not, I'm going to call for a vote.
Move to adjourn by Gustina.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Yeomans.
So noted. Motion carried. Next item, please.
Next item, 12F. Discussion and possible action on the form of the organizational meeting.
I don't see 12F.
That was in addition to the agenda.
It was the amended
agenda.
Okay. Sorry.
Was there a motion to put it on the floor?
I'll make the motion.
This is Bussy. I'll move it.
It was moved by Brill, seconded by Bostwick. Josh and Rich, I think I'll ask you to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I'll ask
Why don't we
Rich
start with you?
Yeah, I'll ask Rich to start if you don't mind.
Yeah, Rich, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as many of you, I'm sure, have looking at the calendar ahead and thinking about the election and how we maintain the continuity of the county board, have thought about, we are posed with some unique challenges with regard to the organizational meeting that is currently scheduled for April the 21st. So just to remind folks about kind of how this happens every 2 years, we have an election that just happened. And then about 2 weeks after that, we have our first county board meeting. That's called the organizational meeting. At that county board meeting, the first thing that happens is that all the supervisors are sworn in. They are given an oral oath, and they also have to sign a written oath. And then we organize ourselves, and we do that by electing, or I should say the board does that by electing a chair and then electing a vice chair. And both of those elections, by kind of custom and tradition, have happened by a anonymous ballot or a secret ballot. So typically Lisa actually runs that meeting until the chair is elected. And I assist Lisa with that, and we actually hand out paper ballots, and assuming that there's a contested election for chair or for vice chair, people vote by paper ballot, and we keep voting until there is someone who has garnered the majority of votes for the position. And then the last item that we usually do is we adopt the rules for the next 2 years that we're going to use in order to govern the board and its operations, and how we record votes and committees operate, and the jurisdiction of different bodies and things like that. So obviously, with the Safer at Home order from the governor and our current operations of using remote meetings, that poses some unique challenges for how we go about doing things. You know, and as this is an organizational meeting, staff really doesn't have skin in the game here. This is really about the board choosing how to kind of form itself. So in looking at kind of how we could make an organizational meeting work in the current environment, one thing became clear is that it would be very, in fact, I think impossible to have a actual secret ballot conducted by remote meeting. And so that means that things are going to have to change if we're going to kind of follow the current practices. And so I wanted to present, and Josh and I, in talking about it, want to present the board with kind of what we see as the sphere of options, and really let the board choose for itself how it wanted to conduct that organizational meeting coming up. So I'm going to kind of go through what I've laid out as kind of the 4 options for how we conduct an organizational meeting, and then cede the floor. And the board really then can choose what it would like to do. Of course, Josh and I will be available for questions if there are any. But we really don't have a precise recommendation at this time, because it's really about what the board would like to choose to do. So the first one is to conduct a remote meeting by Zoom and have just full roll call votes for the purposes of the election, which would mean they would be in public. There would be no secret ballot. You would profess your preference for both chair and vice chair by roll call vote at each of the instances that we needed to vote for any of those candidates. So the second option then would be to have a remote meeting, but try and have kind of a semi-secret ballot via electronic voting of some kind. And we haven't, worked out exactly how that would work, but it could be an email sent in to vote. We could use an electronic survey mechanism like SurveyMonkey or Google Survey. There's also a voting module built into Zoom that we might be able to use. And we would have to play around and try and figure out what the best kind of way to record those votes would be. But in using that electronic voting process, at least Lisa, and probably Lisa and I, for just purposes of verifying votes, would be able to see who was voting for whom, and we would be creating a record of those votes. Even if the other board members weren't to see them at the time, that record would be available, and we would have to conduct a standard public records analysis if we ever got an open records request for those records. The third way would be to hold an in-person meeting, the same as we always have. So government operations, such as board meetings, are considered an essential function under the governor's Safer at Home order. They can still be conducted in person, legally speaking. There are some communities that are doing that. We've made, the decision with the advice of public health that we, and our ability to conduct these meetings, that it is a better public health outcome. It is safer for everyone if we can conduct them remotely, as to this point. But it is an option to still hold an in-person meeting the same way that we've always done, and try to figure out a way to engage in some social distancing via the in-person meeting. So there might be a number of ways that we could attempt to do that. We could spread out even within the courthouse possibly, and still use electronic communications, either phone lines or some kind of maybe Zoom or something else. We could attempt to secure an alternate meeting site that was much larger, that we could then space supervisors farther apart in. Or we could use courtroom H in the same way that we've always done, and try and figure out, strategize with ways to engage in some social distancing. And then the last way, the last option available is to delay the meeting in some way. And this is there's two prongs to the delay mechanism. So there's an explicit ability to delay the meeting built into the Wisconsin statutes that allows us to delay the organizational meeting for up to 3 weeks explicitly. And that can be done simply by a majority of supervisors requesting that delay to the county clerk, in which case the county clerk would then set the meeting for 3 weeks after April 21st. If we do that, it means we do not have a board for 3 weeks, because on April 21st, all of the board seats are deemed vacant, and we would have no supervisors sworn in to occupy those seats. And so we would be deferring anything that needed board action for 3 weeks. It also wouldn't necessarily get us to a place where we were in a safer place with regard to social distancing. I think, as we're all seeing, we have not hit the peak yet with regard to, for sure, hospitalizations and probably transmission of the disease as well. And so 3 weeks may not really buy us very much time. It may just buy us a chance to explore other options. The other way to delay the meeting would be to convene a meeting remotely and swear everyone in, have Lisa swear everyone into their positions, and then make one motion, which would be to move that the status quo with regard to board positions and committee assignments be maintained until such time as the board can meet in person and hold an organizational meeting, at which point the subsequent organizational meeting would supersede any organizational activity that happened prior to that. And I can certainly, if there's questions about that, I can answer them. And so we would then be basically kind of a hold in place or a status quo circumstance until the board was actually able to meet in person. So that's the kind of universe of options available to the board. And I guess I would throw it back to either Josh or the chair to add any other context that they wish to add.
Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think Rich covers it pretty well. We're trying to kind of frame and narrow down some options for you, and maybe there's other options that you have that you tweak some of those in some way, but just trying to make it as, I know after that presentation that maybe the word simple isn't the word, but trying to make it as simple as possible to choose among different kinds of options and which lane you want to be in. And so, again, Rich can answer questions, I can answer questions, but ultimately, I think the goal, as Rich said, was to kind of just have the board have a discussion about what your preferences were.
I think one of the big concerns is on the 21st, the board is dissolved. It ceases to exist. So no business can be transacted. And I don't think that is a good idea, but now is the time to weigh in, starting with Supervisor Fox.
I would be completely comfortable and in favor of having a very short in-person meeting in the normal county board chambers to conduct the business that we need to conduct to maintain the continuity of the board.
Thank you. Supervisor Owens, you have your hand up?
Yes, please, Mr. Chairman. I have to agree with Supervisor Fox due to the fact that there are potential changes due to the election that you potentially have new people. We're going to have to swear them in anyway, so that would be the time to do that.
Thank you. Supervisors Bostwick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am thinking that, what we've done here tonight with roll call voting, it was cumbersome, but it was effective. And I'm thinking we could do the same thing with the election of officers for the county board. I believe you, Lisa, or whoever is hosting the meeting have the option of muting everybody, I think both audio and video. And if that were the case, when it came time for the voting, everybody would be muted and you would unmute people one person at a time, get their vote, mute them, go to the next. It would take a little more time than normal, but that would allow people to remain safe at home and still have our secret ballot. I think that's a really good compromise. Thank you.
Supervisor Agutter, I believe you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wouldn't be comfortable attending an in-person meeting as an essential employee working in a grocery store and dealing with hundreds of people a day. I don't want to expose other people to being exposed to.
Thank you, Supervisor Agutter. Supervisor Bonkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How many people are actually running against somebody? How many seats would that be? And then I have a follow-up question to that also then. And then I shouldn't say follow-up question. I would be in favor of just status quo like we're doing. Swear everybody in on Zoom, and because I don't think there's many chairs that are being challenged to where they couldn't go into that position on that committee until say 6 months down the road when we could all meet in person.
So to answer the question about challenged seats, and I can let Lisa or Josh answer the actual question, but to make a point about it, it doesn't actually matter how many seats are new individuals, because at 11:59 on the 21st, the 20th, I guess, all the seats of the county board go vacant. And they are not occupied until everyone is sworn in. So we swear everyone in anew for each 2-year term. And so if there is no swearing in at that point in time, there is no board and there are no committees. And there is no government business that would need board or committee approval that could be conducted, just to be clear.
So Lisa, how many contested elections do we have? Do you remember?
It's 8 or 9 seats, but we do have some new people running that aren't contested too.
So I think the challenge potentially with the status quo, which we'd have to figure out if we were to use the example that was being discussed of, let's say there's a short Zoom meeting, the board is sworn in electronically, and then status quo as far as board positions, as Rich indicated, occurs, depending on the composition of the board. To Supervisor Baumkamp's question, there may or may not be, certainly there'd be committee vacancies potentially. I don't know if there'd be chairs, so there'd have to be some other process at some point, to put in process. If there was a vacant committee chair, oftentimes we have a vice chair, who might step up during that interim time period. But as far as, appointments to committees, there might have to be at a subsequent meeting, as there is now, some appointments to put those new supervisors that might be on the board on committees in an interim time period, which I believe, as Rich said before, and Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, at that subsequent organizational meeting, then there'd be another round of reappointments to committees, as typically occurs, that might reshuffle more broadly than this.
That's correct. So we would, under that scenario, the way that I envision it would be that so after the first organizational meeting in which the status quo was maintained, the normal rules would apply. So the board chair could make appointments in the standard way that we would always make appointments for new supervisors, that came in the middle of a term, basically, is kind of how we would treat them. And then at a subsequent time when we had kind of the real organizational meeting, the sort of reshuffling of committees, which always happens every 2 years, would be triggered at that time.
Comments?
Okay.
Supervisor Bonkamp?
I'm good, thank you.
I have a comment.
Supervisor Holman?
Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is kind of a twofold question. If per se it was done in courtroom H, would this meeting, because we are a public meetings and open to the public. Would that be stopped for that particular meeting? And the next thing, does courtroom facilitate enough open room to spread everybody out all over the whole courtroom?
In terms of, we would need to provide access to the public, so reasonable access to the public. So staff could talk about what that might look like. I do know that other bodies across the state at times have streamed or broadcast their meetings as an alternative to allowing the public into the meeting for differing reasons. I don't know if technologically we could make that work in the time frame that we have available. In terms of spacing people out, I guess I would defer, to others about whether that would be feasible or not.
Anyone else with a thought on this?
I have a question about something that is not necessarily connected to this. The WCA recently had a lot of discussion about whether or not we should have a second vice chair in place because of the potential for coronavirus to take away a member.
Supervisor Bryan, did I see your hand up?
Yes. I got a question for Lisa. You're not allowed to count the ballots until after 4 o'clock on Monday. Is that correct?
No, they're not allowed to release the results until 8 o'clock, till 4 o'clock on Monday. So they'll be they're transmitting those results into me after 4 o'clock on Monday.
So actually those votes have been counted though, right?
They're in the machines. They're not tabulated. It's holding them until 4 o'clock when then they can do the tabulation on the machines.
Okay, my other part to that is then those results aren't really official until after the board of canvassers. So
correct.
Roughly how long will it take to actually certify the election?
So we are going to, Board of Canvass is actually going to meet on Monday, do a quick meeting to reset the time to meet a state statute. And then we're going to meet at 9 o'clock on Wednesday and go through everything. And it takes 6 to 9 hours to go through all of the results.
Right.
And we'll certify on Wednesday.
Getting back to how we should conduct the swearing in and the organizational meeting. Any further comments? Supervisor Potter?
Yeah, I too second what Supervisor Agater said. I'm out there on construction sites. I would feel terrible if I came into contact with one of our board members and I'm asymptomatic and heaven forbid I gave somebody coronavirus. So I totally agree. I think we should continue on Zoom and there's got to be a way we can figure it out.
Other comments?
Jeremy.
Supervisor Sajak?
I guess I would say I'd be in favor of either process. If we were to have a meeting, I would attend. And then if we were to do it via Zoom, I think that a roll call would be just fine. I don't necessarily think putting it, if it's not secret ballot, by just giving it to 1 or 2 or 3 people, it's still it just might as well be roll call. But one of the things I was going to ask is the swearing in that can happen through Zoom. That's legal, yes. Okay,
yes,
so then the only thing we really, if we want to instill a secret ballot, is that's the only reason to meet. Am I right?
Yes.
Well, I a suggestion, or maybe it's not legal that way, but is there a way? I just picked up my iPad from the front of the building when you guys downloaded stuff on there. There can't be a box there, a checklist for us to check in and have things put in anonymously that way.
There is no law on the books that says it must be a secret ballot. That has just been a tradition in Rock County.
So I think that the challenge, and Rich can chime in too, the challenge in the suggestion about the box being at the front would have to, how you'd incorporate that into, you'd have to have a meeting at some point for nominations to be put forth for the chair and vice chair. And so you'd have to know who was nominated before you could vote, and kind of the difference between how it happens in the meeting versus what might happen to come to the front of the building and put your vote in a box. Is that the correct way to say it, Rich?
Yeah, I think there's two other, that's definitely a challenge, and there's two others as well. One being related to the nominations piece, that the rules currently provide that candidates for chair and vice chair be given an opportunity to address the board to kind of make their case. That was actually a rule that we added after the last board chair election. And then the other one being is that generally under Robert's rules for an internal election like this, it's not just a plurality that controls. Somebody actually has to garner the majority of votes. You know, and it's maybe a rare circumstance, and maybe it's not practical this year, but if we were to have 3 candidates, we would have to have multiple elections, like for the same position. So we would vote once, and if somebody did not garner a majority, we would keep voting until somebody garnered a majority. So having that repetition of vote is really difficult if we have to basically take a 4 or 5 hour break to have everyone deliver in their voting card and then reconvene and then vote again. And maybe that's not a very practical problem, because I think it's unlikely to be present, but it is a contingency I think about at least.
Thank you.
Other comments?
Yes, Chair.
Who's
Supervisor
Chair,
Richard.
this is
your name?
This is Supervisor Richard.
Go ahead, Supervisor Richard.
Yeah, well, I respect the concerns of the essential employees. This does work fairly well. We have had some technical difficulties. We had Supervisor Knudsen 2 weeks ago not able to weigh in on a topic. Tonight we've had background noise. We have consistent issues. I think that organizational meeting requires so many different complex discussions and votes that it is important to meet in person. However, the courthouse, it seems to me offhand, is not going to be large enough for social distancing, which will be important. Of course, we can't do anything but that after we are telling the public that's what we need to do. So maybe Whitewater, Rock County might work for the theater, might work for location. Another part of the reason to meet in person is we're going to have organizational rules be discussed, very complex, long-term issues that may be much better needed in person. I think that we all can handle the protocol of what's needed to prevent a health issue for those reasons. Thank you.
Supervisor Bieber, I believe you're next.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm totally against an in-person meeting, and I think you guys all probably know why. As being immune suppressed, it's not a good idea for myself, and there's other board members that have the same issue, to be meeting at this time as we're telling our public, you're supposed to stay home. You're supposed to, be in your house. Only essential employees are supposed to be out working. Even moving it to a bigger area. I mean, you're all going to have masks of some sort if that's what you intend to do, because you're going to be sharing air. You're going to be walking by a place that someone may be sitting at that you sneezed or coughed going by. I just think, yes, it's important. I mean, to swear us all in, I agree with that. I don't understand why we can't do it on Zoom. As far as a meeting in person, what does it go after? Elderly and people with suppressed immune systems. It's even hitting people in between those ages now. And I would hate to see anybody catch it, and heaven forbid someone would die from it, because we felt it was important to meet to get sworn in. Swear us in. As far as the secret ballot, why secret? Just vote the way you want to vote, and be done with it. We're all adults. I mean, that's all I have to say, and
Supervisor
listening.
Fox.
Yeah, with all due respect to the concerns, maybe an alternative option that maybe hasn't been laid out yet is the ability to vote via text. I know even those that aren't zooming in could still conference call and text at the same time, as could those that are on Zoom. We could cast a vote via text. If somebody could be on the county's end, a catcher for the text voting, just a thought.
Further discussion, Supervisor Bryan?
What will be the process for getting changes for the policies and stuff that we vote on the reorg meeting?
In terms of submissions?
Correct.
So generally,
go through a committee to begin with before it gets there?
So generally, we those requested rule changes are submitted to me. You can submit them via email if you'd like, or send them to my office, or you can call me, either my office phone, or if I certainly can provide my cell phone number to anyone who would like to talk to me about rule changes. We have typically taken those to County Board Staff Committee in the immediate County Board Staff Committee prior to the reorganizational meeting. I don't know whether we're going to do that this year or not. We have not discussed that with Chair Podzilny yet, and I'm unsure of the status of County Board staff for next week at this point in time. And so I don't know if the chair or Mr. Smith has any further input on that.
So the other thing can changes be brought from the floor that day of the reorg meeting?
Yes. So anytime that we're dealing with a resolution or especially internal rules, those don't have to be cleared through a prior approval process in order to be considered by the board.
Thank you.
Supervisor Yeomans with a question.
Go ahead, Supervisor Yeomans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thought that occurred to me is that we have a Zoom meeting where we swear everybody in, and then we have a motion to continue the current committee structures and president and vice president that we have in place for a period of time, say 2 or 3 months, until such times we feel comfortable that we can meet in person and discuss and be able to have a secret ballot. And also during that time, we could have the ability to think about any rule changes and have a discussion process. If 2 people or 3 people want to run for the board chair, they have an opportunity to actually campaign and come up with a platform and do all the things that would be maybe help us become a better organization rather than just do everything in one night. And is it possible to have something like that happen?
Yes. So we would have to figure out what the precise wording of the motion would be, but that's the option of delay that I had described, where we convene in some fashion, whether it's Zoom or otherwise, we swear in the board, and then the first order of business, someone, excuse me, somebody makes a motion to basically hold the status quo, which would include appointment of the chair and vice chair that are currently chair and vice chair, and then would also hold the rules as is, so that the committee structures would remain appointed and any new supervisors to the board could be appointed in the ordinary manner that we would appoint new supervisors in the middle of a term. And then we would have to craft, or someone would have to craft how they want that to end, whether it's a set period of time, whether it's linked to the Safer at Home order or other declaration of emergency from either the county itself or the governor's declaration of emergency. But we could explicitly either time limit it in reference to something else, or put a precise date on it and say that on August 1st, when the first Tuesday after August 1st, then we would have an organizational meeting. All of those would be options.
Okay, thank you. It seems like that will at least temporarily solve the problem of having a board. And it also solves the problem of the discomfort that the elderly, such as myself, have with self quarantining. I agree. I don't think that as much as this is a very important thing, it's not life and death. So anyway, I would see if any other board member would be comfortable with that. So if so, speak up, please.
Supervisor Potter?
My only question is, Mary Mooney has an opponent. What happens if she loses to her opponent? Then who becomes vice chair?
So there's no mechanism in the board rules short of an election to appoint a vice chair. So we don't have an automatic succession into the vice chair position. We have a rule that says upon disability or unavailability of the chair and vice chair, then there's kind of an order of succession about who exercises powers of the chair. But with the chair being occupied by someone, there is no automatic appointment to fill that position. So that position would remain vacant until there was an election to elect someone to that vice chair position.
Supervisor Thomas, I believe you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I agree with Supervisor Yeoman. I too do not want an in-person meeting because of some health problems, and I think it would be okay for us to be sworn in and have a stay of things the way they are now, and have our organizational meeting for the resolutions or changing the rules at a later date.
Thank you, Supervisor Thomas. Anyone else here?
Mr. Chair Sweeney.
Supervisor Sweeney, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Supervisor Fox and Supervisor Bostwick's idea are both excellent. It would quickly take care of the secret ballot issue, and then we could do our reorganization at our first available face-to-face meeting.
Thank you, Supervisor Sweeney. Other comments?
Supervisor Gramke.
Go ahead, Supervisor Gramke.
I put on a mask and worked all day Tuesday at the polls. I'm not opposed to getting together to get this done in the easiest manner, but I like Supervisor Yeoman's idea of keeping everybody safe and getting the job done with the least amount of discomfort and the least amount of trying to work it out all technologically. So I would favor Supervisor Yeoman's idea.
Thank you. Other comments? Supervisor Owens?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Rask has been trying to get your attention for quite some time.
Supervisor Rashkin? Thank you. Supervisor Owens?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that at this point that we hold the vote by Zoom, and then postpone the election until a such date as it's effective to meet safely for everybody. You being the oldest, and Miss Bussey being the second, and me being the third, I think that the three of us old folks would be very appreciative of that. So if somebody wants to second that motion, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Supervisor Owens, can I ask a clarifying question? So are you referring to voting for chair and vice chair electronically, whether it's text message or email or some other electronic means? Or are you referring to Supervisor Yeoman's suggestion of voting on a delay, holding the status quo and delaying the reorganization of the board?
I think the most important thing at this particular point is the getting everybody sworn in so that we do have representation, people who are authorized to fill the positions for which they are elected. And at that particular point, hold at a later date, and maintaining the current status quo with regard to chairman and vice chairman and so forth, as long as they're still on the board, until such time as we can have a safe meeting. Does that clarify your question?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Supervisor Yeomans would second that.
Seconded by Supervisor Yeomans. Further discussion? Further comments? Any other suggestions? Have you got that, Lisa?
I believe so.
Would you like to read that back, please?
So we'll have the meeting to vote basically to swear everyone in, to maintain the current chair and vice chair if they are both reelected, until we can have a safe meeting.
Is that correct, Supervisor Owens?
That is correct.
That the way you read it, Supervisor Yeomans? Supervisor Yeomans?
Yes, sorry about that.
That's okay. Rich, are you comfortable with this?
Yeah. I guess I should have mentioned this before, but one thing that we will need to make sure everyone has in their mind is that there still will need to be a motion at the organizational meeting to effectuate this. If that motion were to fail, we would need to have a board chair election. So, of course, with a new board, there may be some education that needs to happen with regard to how things are going to proceed. And so Supervisor Owens or Supervisor Yeomans or somebody would make a motion at the organizational meeting. There would be a vote. And if the no votes prevailed, we would continue with the organizational meeting. So.
Okay. Does everybody understand this?
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question real quick of Corp Counsel?
Yes.
In the motion that Supervisors Owens and Yeomans created, do we need, is it important to have a time as part of that motion, or can it be until a safe meeting?
It can be until a safe meeting. We will need to explicitly lay that out at the organizational meeting in the motion that's made at the organizational meeting so that we know when to convene the real organizational meeting, so to speak. But for now, I believe that Supervisor Owens' motion is clear enough.
Further discussion? Comments?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. So we're just avoiding an election of the chair and vice chair. That's the whole purpose of this particular motion.
Who is speaking?
Yes. Jeremy.
Oh, Jeremy. Okay. Rich Greenlee, fill us in here. I think there's some confusion on what this motion is.
Yeah, so the motion gives direction for how staff is going to set up the meeting, really, and what the expectations are of the board at the meeting itself. So maybe to fill in a little bit of the backstory, in having this discussion about practically trying to make this meeting work, both Josh and I felt very uncomfortable making any decisions about the best way to make it work on behalf of the board, because ultimately it's about the board governing itself. And so we wanted some direction. So I would take this direction from Supervisor Owens to be that we will be setting up an electronic meeting, and that the expectation at that electronic meeting would be there would be a motion to maintain the status quo of chair and vice chair and no election. And we would then expect to set an organizational meeting in the future, if that motion is successful, where there would be an election and where a committee, after which there would be committee assignments submitted in the normal way that we usually do. And those would not be submitted after the 21st.
So who would make the board, who would make these committee?
So the committees would stay as constituted, with new board supervisor members being appointed to committees in the same manner as if they were occupying an already existing term. So the chair would make those appointments.
Gotcha. Thank you.
We have two committee chairs who are retiring, and that is Hank Burrell from General Services and BJ Bussey from Public Works. Now, each of those committees has a vice chair that could be moved up. Further discussion. We have a motion on the floor.
Supervisor Richard?
Supervisor Richard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We don't know the extent of the self-isolation guidelines. If the virus continues, as some may say, it could be several months before there could be a safe meeting. Just a question on procedure. Is it possible at some point to have those meet in person, social distance, and have others who don't want to be there, who don't feel comfortable with that, call in? Can we do a mixed meeting?
The short answer is yes. I think it's one of technology and making sure that that is a workable solution. And so we certainly can explore that option with IT and start testing it and trying to see if we can make something like a mixed meeting work.
Can I hear it from some supervisors who have not had a chance to weigh in on this yet?
Supervisor Sweeney.
Supervisor Sweeney, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you're going to go through the process of this meeting, it is not a stretch by any means to elect the chair and vice chair by the two means that were brought up earlier. Mr. Fox and Mr. Bostwick brought those good ideas up. We can take care of it. We can take care of it all at the same time.
Other supervisors wishing to weigh in? Can you read that back to us, Lisa? This is not a test.
So is to vote by electronic to maintain the current chair and vice chair for re-elected until a safe meeting can be held.
Supervisor Owens is shaking his head.
What did I miss?
The fundamental concept of my motion, number one, is to maintain the continuity of the board, so that the motion primarily was to aim at having the elections done. I'm sorry, not election, being the people who are elected to be sworn in by Zoom, and then the current board chairman and so forth maintain their position until such time as we can have an organizational meeting.
And all committees remain the same, or people be replaced?
That's up to the board. That's up to the board chairman. That's the board chairman's, to maintain that continuity. The board chairman would still have his full authorities as he would normally have.
Thank you,
Supervisor. Until such time as a meeting could be held for a re-election.
Mr. Greenlee.
Yes.
Are we good here?
I believe so. I mean, Supervisor Potter has his hand up, so.
Supervisor Potter?
I support Supervisor Fox and Bostwick on holding an electronic election for the board chair and vice chair.
On the 21st. And then postponing the Well, are we confusing what we've got on the floor in terms of a
Yeah,
motion?
point of order.
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chair, we have a motion and a second at this particular point to approve or disapprove the process of voting or in having the new people installed by electronic means at this particular point, and maintaining the current status quo as far as the position of individuals. Anything beyond that with regard to having an organizational meeting and so forth, that is another condition at a later point. Am I correct, Mr. Greenlee?
Are we getting confused here, Mr. Greenlee?
Well, I think what's happening is that there's an active motion on the floor that some supervisors, if I'm hearing correctly, might be opposed to. And they're voicing their opposition by stating their support for a different viable alternative to the current motion that's on the floor. So for those supervisors that may support a different idea, they would vote no on this motion and then make a motion of their own to use one of those alternatives.
Lisa, would you read the motion back to us? Then I'll get to you, Tom Bryan.
So we're voting to maintain, during the organizational meeting, we'll vote to maintain the chair and vice chair until until it's safe to have a in-person meeting. So basically just to keep the board going and coming in to swear an oath.
The primary point I'm trying to make is that that none of this can happen unless we're sworn in. So my primary goal here is to maintain the continuity by getting all of the new supervisors sworn in electronically first. That maintains the continuity of the board and then allows us to proceed from that point at a later point to do the reorganization. The suggestion to maintain the status quo after everybody is sworn in is to give you the opportunity at a later date to make those modifications and changes to the board.
Supervisor Fox, did I see your hand up?
No, sir.
Oh, Supervisor Davis?
No comment.
Brian, I get back to you.
I request a roll call vote.
I have my hand up now.
No, Supervisor Fox.
Let's just maybe clarify what everybody's voting on one more time.
Lisa?
So at the organizational meeting, you'll swear everyone in, vote to maintain the current chair and vice chair if they're reelected until a safe meeting can be held in person.
Thank you.
Call for the question.
The question has been called and it is roll call. Did somebody ask for that?
Yes, I did.
Lisa?
Pierre? Agutter?
No.
Beaver?
Yes.
Potter?
No.
Mowini?
Potter said no.
Yes.
3,
Fox?
yes.
Yes for Fox.
4,
Richard?
Yes.
5,
Christina?
Yes.
6,
Bussey?
Yes.
7.
Davis?
No.
Thomas?
Yes.
Knutson?
Yes.
9,
Holman?
yes. 10,
Raskin? Rashkin, you said no, correct? Thank you. Gramke?
Yes.
Yeoman?
Yes.
Levy,
Yes.
Brill, Schultz, Zajac,
No.
Bostwick,
No.
Sweeney,
No.
Baumkamp,
No.
Owens,
Yes.
Bryan,
No.
Podzilny.
No.
I am not sure how Supervisor Schultz voted. And I did not hear Supervisor Peer either.
This is Supervisor Peer. I voted yes.
Thank you.
Lisa,
Supervisor Brill? What was that?
did you call Wayne?
I have you as yes. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, that is correct.
I did not hear Supervisor Brill.
I think it's like 16 to 4 or 16 to 7, something like that.
So I don't have votes for Brill or Schultz. Are they still on?
Have the election next time we supposedly meet like this.
Supervisor Schultz, are you still there?
Yes.
Did you vote?
Thank you.
Yes.
How did
And
you?
my answer is no.
Thank you, Kathy.
Who else did you not get a vote from, Lisa?
From Hank Brill.
Hank, your vote? Supervisor Brill? Supervisor Brill, are you still with us? I don't see his name up there at the moment.
I see him on.
I see him on mine.
Supervisor Brill? Will his vote be critical to the outcome of this?
Without his vote, it's 14 yes and 11 no.
So his vote would not swing this one way or the other.
No.
So the motion is approved, correct?
Correct.
On a vote of 14 to 11?
Correct.
Okay, that's it. Any other comments from anybody before I call for adjournment?
Sure. Can I ask a question? Jeremy.
Go ahead, Supervisor Zajac.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this possible that with the new body that we revisit this vote?
I don't quite understand your question.
This is Supervisor Yeoman speaking. It seems to me that it's going to be a motion after the swearing in to accomplish this, and there will be an opportunity to vote then. That motion may not pass, and then we would continue doing what we're doing.
Correct.
Right, as Rich said earlier, I think that describes it accurately, that this is directing us to set up a meeting at which time we'd expect a motion to do what you've just voted to do. And that if it fails, as Corp Counsel described earlier, then we'd still be in a meeting, organizational meeting, and all else being set aside, there would be need for more discussion and election of a chair and vice chair. Is that the way to describe it, Rich?
Yes.
Thank you.
Supervisor Fox?
Yeah, just one more question. When do we decide that we're no longer sheltering in place. When the governor lifts the order, when the president lifts the order, just curious.
It's quite the existential question. So, I mean, I think I don't think there's a clear answer to that. I mean, I think there are a number of different overlapping influences going on here. Obviously, the president, the federal government, and the CDC are issuing guidelines about people's behavior. Those are just guidelines. They are not enforceable by local communities generally. The state has issued its own set of orders and also additional guidelines and advisories in conjunction with that. And then the local health department has the ability to issue its own set of guidelines. For instance, if the safer at home order were to expire, it would be possible for the local health department to still order some kind of subset that's locality specific of a permutation of that. So I don't know that that's a question that's really answerable until we get to a later date and point in time in which the future looks more clear than it does.
And I would add on that the exactly right. And I think what governs again, you govern your own meetings. And so what happened is after the governor's order and the emergency declaration that was declared for the county, one of the first administrative orders we did was to allow the county board to meet electronically. And so that's what we've been doing since then. But as the debate has been tonight, at any time, just as the county board met to affirm the emergency declaration, it controls its own destiny, and its services are essential. And so I think if the board chose at whatever point in the future that it was done with Zoom, and even if there were still emergency orders in place, the board could choose to meet with appropriate social distancing guidelines, as other committees and boards around the state continue to do. So I do think that it's up to the committee to decide at what point it's ready to do that again. And I think you've talked about tonight some of the concerns about that even after those orders are gone, there are some committee members or some board members who probably would be concerned about meeting in person again. Supervisor Richards' question about hybrid is something that may come up at that time. So really, again, the only thing that's requiring you to meet now is sort of the decision of the chair and your own sort of decision about when you want to meet in person again.
Supervisor Yeomans here.
Go ahead, Supervisor Yeomans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would think that the motion at the meeting would say something like, until such time as it's safe to hold the determination of chair and vice chair. It may be that we find a secret ballot that we can do electronically and have 2 or 3 different votes and all that. We may come up with some way to do it without ever meeting in person, and I don't have a problem with that. I just want to make sure that we follow the rules that we've set and do it appropriately, safely.
Mr. Chair, Sweeney with a question.
Go ahead, Supervisor Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for Josh and Rich. In the event that after swearing in, the new board feels the selection of the chair and vice chair should be done right of way, would it behoove the staff to have that process ready?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer to that question is yes. Certainly, Lisa, Josh, and I will be talking about all the contingencies that can happen at the organizational meeting to make sure that we're prepared.
Brill here. I just came back on yes on the vote.
Thank you, Supervisor Brill. That is the last item on the agenda. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Supervisor Peer.
Second by Bostwick. Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.